Recording in progress.
Hello, everyone. I am sometimes asked by people what it is that I work on, that I research as an academic. I struggle to answer this question partly because my research does not have one specific focus. Perhaps because of my initial training as a physicist, I see my academic existence in terms of an ongoing series of problems to be solved. I take up one problem, study it for a few months or a few years, and write an article or a book chapter or a book about it. Then I move on in search of a new problem. May every new year bring me a new problem, and may I feel inspired to solve or dissolve that problem. That is my prayer to the divine unknown. Having said that, in one way or another, I study the socio-religious aspects of Hinduism in the region of South Asia called Bengal. I should say I study the idea of Bengal. That is, Bengal as a set of concepts of being, becoming, and belonging, and not just the geographical landmass marked as Bengal in India and Bangladesh on international maps. I regret to say that I am required by academic conventions to write in a heavily technical style filled with footnotes, endnotes, and such terrible things. If you are not yourself an academic, I will never inflict on you the torture of having to read what I write in my monographs and articles. Now, when I look at the last 3 books I have published, I realize, even if only retrospectively, that there is one consistent thread running through them. And this thread is a famous narrative in the 10th chapter of a scriptural text in Sanskrit called the Bhagavata Purana from roughly the 9th century Common Era. One evening in autumn, when Krishna plays on his world-enthralling flute, the cowherd women, the gopis, leave aside their domestic chores to dance with Krishna. At a certain point, at a certain stage in the narrative, Krishna disappears, and the gopis are filled with an unbearable agony. Somehow from within this dark night of the soul, the gopis begin to discern the sparks of salvation. In the light of this narrative, here is a famous question that runs through roughly 2000 years of Hindu theology. Is the pathway to God self-knowledge, jnana, dhyana, atmavidya, or is the pathway to God devotional love, bhakti, prema? Around 8 years ago, I started reading the complete works of Rabindranath Tagore in Bengali. In one edition, they run into 30 volumes. The reason why I undertook this Herculean task is not directly related to my academic publications. I had a feeling around 8 years ago that Tagore had written somewhere, a true guru would never accept any disciples. Now that is a paradox. How can a guru be a guru if they do not accept disciples? The way to dissolve this paradox is, of course, to redefine the terms. There is, in deep truth, no guru and no disciple. there is in deep truth the existential spiral of a guru who becomes a guru by teaching the disciple who becomes a disciple by learning to teach the guru. So to repeat, there is in deep truth the existential spiral of a guru who becomes a guru by teaching the disciple who becomes a disciple by learning to teach the guru. After methodically reading through those 30 volumes over 4 years, I realized that Tagore did not express this pedagogic view in so many words. I felt sad. I really wanted to quote Tagore, saying something along these lines. Be that as it may, two things happened during this enterprise of reading 30 volumes over 4 years. First, I configured my own iteration of this paradox. I would like to have many students, but all my students should learn to teach themselves. That is a paradox. I will not directly comment on it. Instead, I will read out the dedicatory notes to my students from 3 of my books. One of them says, "To all my students, for teaching me how to teach." Another says, "To all my students, for restoring the spirit in a jaded soul." And another says, "To all my students, for thinking through my thinking." Second, after reading 30 volumes of Tagore's Bengali texts, I realized that I know enough about Tagore's engagements with the Hindu theological question to start writing a book. To repeat, the question is the pathway to God self-knowledge, or is the pathway to God devotional love? In short, what my book on Tagore says is this. On the one hand, Tagore was wary about certain types of intentionally passionate bhakti, and possibly he was temperamentally more aligned with the language of self-knowledge. But on the other hand, many of his songs are deeply suffused with the language of bhakti. It is not so much the devotional sentiment of bhakti that Tagore was opposed to, but what he characterized as its potential to draw individuals away from a robust engagement with the heat and dust of the everyday world. What Tagore looks for is a form of bhakti that does not make you forget your own self, rather a form of bhakti that makes you remember yourself by concentrating yourself in the divine foundation of the world. So here is Tagore's key theological claim in the form of a paradox. In the process of forgetting yourself, always keep in mind the I that is trying to forget itself. In short, at certain stages of his life, Tagore had a certain ambivalence towards worldviews shaped by bhakti. And these reflections on bhakti generated my book on Tagore. Around this time, I realized that this ambivalence about bhakti was shared by many individuals associated with the Brahmo Samaj a society which was founded by Ram Mohan Roy in 1828 and later revived by Tagore's father, Debendranath Tagore. To the question, is the pathway to God self-knowledge or is the pathway to God devotional love? The official view of many of the Brahmos was self-knowledge, and they were temperamentally disinclined towards speaking the language of ecstatic bhakti. Once again, the general critique of the Brahmo Samaj is that such styles of bhakti make you apathetic towards the world and its everyday concerns and demands. There were some important exceptions to this generalization. Some Brahmos enthusiastically moved in the direction of ecstatic bhakti, or at least tried to domesticate ecstatic bhakti in ways that would be palatable or acceptable to Brahmo orthodoxy. And these observations led to my book on the Brahmo Samaj. To return to the narrative of Krishna and the gopis, if you read the Bengali writings of Rabindranath Tagore and the Bengali writings of many members of the Brahmo Samaj, you may not even realize that they are pointing to this narrative. Generally speaking, Krishna and the gopis are not named. But although they are absent in the letter, they are present in the spirit. You have to become a connoisseur, a relisher of devotional poetry, who understands through subtle hints and allusions that the absence of Krishna and the gopis constitutes their presence. So far, so good. I have been discussing groups of Hindus who are spiritually sober. They are cautious about spiritual intoxication. In the third book, I discuss how the idiom of ecstatic bhakti became a connective tissue across some Hindu and Indo-Islamic milieus in Bengal. Various kinds of Vaishnava, Hindu, and Sufi streams intersected across pre-modern Bengali landscapes to generate hybrid or liminal forms of spirituality. For Krishna and Radha, there are various Perso-Arabic prototypes or translations or variations. Layla and Majnun, Shirin and Farhad, and so on. To summarize this theological argument in an aphorism, the most painful form of presence is absence. But what happens when the language of ecstatic love, of love in absence which is presence, hits the rough road of economic disparity, social ritual hierarchy, and linguistic difference? Is it the case that when we are hungry, love will keep us alive? Or is it the case that when we are hungry, we will love anyone who gives us an ATM card? These thoughts became solidified in my third book. Looking back at these three books, I realize I owe so much to a scriptural narrative in Sanskrit. If that narrative had not been developed, so much would not have happened in the religious history of a vast swathe across northwestern, northern, and eastern India. Around 30 years ago, many decades before I started writing academic articles and books, I learned to sing a certain devotional song composed by the 15th century Vaishnava poet-theologian Shankaradeva, Honkordev. I can assure you that in those days I had absolutely no clue what the song that I'm going to sing meant. The language of the song is Brajavali or a pre-modern form of Maithili, a language I had to teach myself some years ago by sitting next to a few massive dictionaries. Today, as I sing this song, I reflect on how meter and syllable and image and word cohere beautifully in a harmonious tapestry. Every word has to be sung in a specific way, and in just that specific way, in accompaniment with the tabla or the khol or the mridangam. I remember it took me several weeks, perhaps several months, to learn how to properly sing these three words from the last sentence. Koho Krishna Kinkoro, says the servant of Krishna. Even today, when I sing these three words, I feel slightly anxious. What if I get it wrong? What if I lose the beat? Regarding the synthesis or concordance of form and matter that I painstakingly aim at in all my academic writing, I did not learn it by reading books. I acquired it from my musical training. To be able to think as a logician and write as a musician, that is my eschatological vision of academia. I yearn for the day when that vision will be unveiled to me in all its spiritual perfection. In the song, Shankadeva mentions the gopis, the cowherd women, but you will note that he does not mention Radha by name. And that absence of the name Radha is a hermeneutic strategy that Tagore and many people in the Brahmo Samaj would have appreciated. Just as I did not learn academic writing by reading books, but from music, I did not learn what is called interreligious dialogue by reading books, but from music. I started studying, in an academic sense, Christian doctrine and Islamic theology at around the age of 18. Now, these are vast oceans of teachings, experiences, norms, values, and institutions. Often I feel like a lone sailor shipwrecked on some remote island. Yet I never feel completely lost. For instance, if I'm reading in an English translation a Sufi text produced in Central Asia in the 14th century, and I don't quite understand what is being said, I go to the song that I'm going to sing now. I transpose the Sanskrit words gopi and bandhava into the Arabic word wali, which in some contexts mean friend of God. I transpose the Sanskrit word dhyana, which has given us the Japanese word zen, into an Arabic word which I will pronounce as zikr. I transpose the Sanskrit phrase Krishna Kinkoro into the Arabic phrase Abd al-Malik, and I transpose Gokula into Mecca. Slowly and slowly, the 14th century Sufi text begins to swim into the horizon of my understanding. Hare O Dhama O Salohu Gokule Lai Oyare Hamu Bine Gopi Yare Hamu Bine Gopi Rare Hamu Bine Gopi Roti leke joga jai. Hare Udhava Salahu Gokule Lai Oyare Amobine Gopiyare Amobine Gopir Are Amobine Gopirati leke Joga jai Hare Amo Sita Bita Nita Hama Kudiyana Are Dhara Labi Yoge Are Dhara Labi Yoge Are Dhara Labi Yoge Gopi Kathamopi prana Hare Hamake Ahe Gopi Jiye Homudai Are Bahuri Avoro Are Bahuri Avoro Are Bahuri Avoro Krishna Bheto Bodhunai Hare Kaha Krishna Kinkara Hari Ka Bhajaloi Hare Hari Bine Huri Hare Hari Bine Huri Hare Hari Bine Huri Daban Dhava nahi koi Hare Udhava Salahu Gokule